Good afternoon, everyone. Um, my name is Adebisi Sanda on the Oando Ask an Oando Expert platform. I'm here to discuss a wealth of options, choosing the right ESG priorities. It is tempting to see ESG as window dressing a company to look charitable, socially responsible, or climate friendly. However, ESG is not window dressing. It is the management of a wide range of risk and opportunities for the creation of long-term value for an organization. ESG covers a wide variety of concerns, um, but not all ESG issues are relevant or material to every company. For example, a bank might choose to focus on financial inclusion, while an oil and gas company may be more concerned with community issues. How can a company identify and address the ESG issues which are material to its stakeholders? Sure. Sorry for that. There was a technical issue, but hope you've been hearing what I've been saying. ESG is not window dressing. It primarily has to do with managing risk and opportunities to create long-term value for an organization. Whilst ESG covers a wide range of issues, and as we go on, you will see how ESG can quickly jump from climate change to human rights issues to some other issues. As I said, ESG covers a wide range of concerns, and all ESG issues are not relevant or material to every company. For example, a bank may choose to focus on financial inclusion, whilst an oil and gas company may be more concerned with host community issues. How can a company identify and address the ESG issues which are most material to it? That's what we'll be discussing in the next few minutes. First of all, let me just list a number of ESG issues: climate change, carbon emissions, air and water pollution, biodiversity and land use, deforestation, energy efficiency, waste management, and water scarcity. All these come under the environmental leg of ESG. For social issues, you have customer satisfaction, data protection and privacy, gender and diversity, employee engagement, community relations, human rights, supply chain and labor standards, health and safety, financial inclusion. And for governance issues, you have your regular governance, corporate governance issues such as board composition, your committee structures, bribery and corruption, executive compensation, political contribution, whistleblower schemes, and the rest of that. Now, and the rest of that. Now, I want to introduce another. Um, I want to introduce another. I want to introduce another. What was it called? Acronym called SDGs. Now, SDGs are Sustainable Development Goals. These are 17 goals and 179 targets, as well as many more indicators, which were set to um, address global issues. And as ESGs are, these issues can also vary. They include no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, and they have a very wide range and variety. And linking this SDGs provide companies with a pool of topics which are relevant in terms of ESG considerations and sustainability as a whole. Now, why ESG? It's believed that the role of a company is to maximize profits for its shareholders. And this debate has gone on for several years, and different economists, lawyers have made contributions to this conversation, including the famous entrepreneur Henry Ford. In fact, Henry Ford was taken to court by some of the shareholders during his lifetime, and the question was that he wasn't paying them enough dividends because he planned to use those dividends to create more employment and spread the benefits of the industrial development amongst Americans. And the courts in that case said that the purpose of the company is to maximize profits for its shareholders. However, the company failed to go ahead to say that those profits must of necessity be shared amongst the shareholders. So whatever the board of the company decides to do with its profits is left to the board of that company. Now, why ESG? The ESG has a lot of benefits for a company, and part of these benefits is that it's a risk management tool. It enables companies to identify new markets, new opportunities, and the rest of that. ESG also assists, creates customer satisfaction, it creates loyalty, customer and brand loyalty, it improves stakeholder relationships, it improves job satisfaction, and the rest of that. Now, law, stakeholders, and shareholders are actually insisting that companies carry out their business in a way that addresses different ESG issues. And this resonates some of the arguments over the ages regarding ESG as a whole. Now, some of the laws in Nigeria which talk on ESG, as mentioned earlier, is the Companies and Allied Matters Act, Section 305 and 305 subsection 3 and 4 actually mandate directors of the company to give regard to the impact of the company's operation on the environment and community where it carries operation. The section also mandates directors to have regard to the performance of its function, including the interests of the company's employees. And the other acts which also reiterate this. One example is the Climate Change Act, which was enacted in line with the objectives to keep average increases in global temperature within 2 degrees centigrade and limit the temperature to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. Other laws, relevant laws, the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance applies to all public companies, applies to private companies. It applies to private companies that hold public companies. It applies to all regulated companies and concessioned companies. Now, this is principle-based and it contains different principles on corporate governance, including provisions on board of directors, board assurance, relationship with shareholders, and the rest of that. It also has a lot of requirements in terms of sustainability. And then you go into sector related standards and principles, such as the Nigerian Sustainable Banking Principles, which are applied in the banking industry, as well as the SEC sustainable sustainability guidelines. Now, bringing all this together, for a company to develop its sustainability strategy, it needs to take cognizance of relevant laws, relevant regulations, as well as regulations, as well as um, relevant laws, relevant regulations, as well as you know relevant targets which have some sustainability, significance. Um, Sorry, I skipped to mention that aside these laws, there are also certain standards and framework which help guide company, in keeping their ESG strategy on focus. And some of these include the Global Reporting Initiative standards. And bringing this home or connecting all these dots, you need to take cognizance of all relevant ESG issues, which are climate change, the SDGs, everything we've mentioned earlier. Essentially, you need to bring them together and take cognizance of relevant laws that apply to your company and to your sector. You also need to then use this to develop an internal strategy. And can this strategy, it's a process. You first of all set up a team, and then from setting up a team, you need to set up a team. The team can comprise of board of directors, some members of the board of directors, members of senior management and operations executives, and as well as legal professionals. Now, in setting this up, you need to do a materiality assessment, and that's actually the heart of this presentation. We'll go further into what a materiality assessment is and how this can help you, focus your ESG strategy. And then you need to have policies and procedures which will embed, your ESG principle within the organization and also influence your external activities. And these policies and procedures would include things like, the way you do due diligence, onboard your suppliers. It cuts across a range of activities, but at all times, it means that you should always pay attention to the company should always think of its ESG standards and practices. Then after doing this, there's a process of regularly reporting on performance and the performance and progress in terms of the achievement of these ESG goals and targets. And the last but not the least, of course, once you report, you'll be able to detect where you are lacking and what improvements need to be made, and then start the cycle all over again. Now, going into the materiality assessment section. Now, the GRI material topics. And I'm mentioning GRI because a lot of regulators in Nigeria actually specifically recommend the GRI as a standard or a framework for reporting and monitoring ESG activities. Now, the GRI, it's a framework, a sustainability framework, which was developed by a wide range of stakeholders, and they update it from time to time, and it has different sector standards which actually focus on the matters that are most relevant to those sectors. Now, what does it say about materiality assessment? It has a whole chapter on materiality assessment, and that's the GRI 3. And this provides guidance on how to determine material topic and explain how the GRI sector standards are used in this process. Now, you should know that even if you follow the GRI process and you still don't prioritize some impacts, the company may still need to address, impacts that are not covered or that do not appear significant after following this process. So far as the law says, you must address those impacts you must address those impacts. Now, just a quick run through. In these material topics or the ESG issues which the company is prioritizing in terms of tracking and reporting should be reviewed every reporting cycle. And by reporting cycle, we mean like ideally, you should publish your, you should target reporting on ESG issues together with your financial performance. So that should be together with your annual financial cycle, financial statement reporting cycle. Then you document the process of arriving at those topics, and of course obtain approval of the highest governing body for those topics, and that's the board. You can't deprioritize material topics based on the fact that they are not financially material, because that's the whole point of this exercise. So actually measure your impact on the society, the environment, and human rights. And the way of thinking of this is that impacts that are not impacts that are important to society are leading indicators of impact that would eventually become financially material. Now, that will eventually become financially material. Now, understand the organization's context. That's the first step to take in trying to understand what your most relevant ESG issues are. And by the organizational context, we mean the internal and external factors that can impact the organization and its objectives. By activities, we mean purpose, value, mission statement, the business model, the type of activities, the products and services of the company, the sectors the company is operating in, its employees, and the geographic location which it operates in. Business relationships. You also need to take cognizance of the business relationships of the organization, and this includes joint ventures, suppliers, franchisees, agents, security providers, long and short-term geographic location. Sustainability context. Your ESG issues must actually address real challenges at a local, regional, and global level, and it must be in compliance with relevant laws and instruments. And then you must also take cognizance of your stakeholders, who are your business partners, who are the workers in your supply chain, and the future generations. Now, identifying your actual and potential impacts on the environment, economy, people, and human rights. You can think of this impact as either negative or positive, short-term impact, long-term impact, intended or unintended, reversible or irreversible. Now, this is an ongoing thing you should do. It's not something that is necessarily tied to, maybe your ESG reporting, activity. It's something that should be part and parcel of the organization as a whole. Anytime you are entering into a new activity, a new business relationship, a new market, launching a new product or changing a policy, you should actually think about it in terms of its actual and potential impact on the environment, economy, people, and human rights. And how do you do this? Of course, you review a lot of information about the company, its financial statements, its filings with relevant authorities, its health and safety history, past issues that have arisen within the company. You should also consult stakeholders, and in consulting stakeholders, you can determine on how you want to do this, because your stakeholders are wide, and you can't possibly consult every last one of them. So in doing this, you can use stakeholder representatives or stakeholder proxies such as academics, civil organizations. Consider the topics and impacts described in the GRIS sector standard. As said earlier, GRI sector standards, it's being considered by a lot of experts, wide range of stakeholders, and they've determined that certain sectors always have a pattern of impacting on the society, and these patterns are grouped into topics and are then grouped into sector standards. A company is responsible not only for impact related to its own activities, but also impacts that are directly linked to its operations, products, services, or by its business relationship. And what do we mean by this? Even if a company is not doing an activity, it can still be relevant to it. For example, apparel manufacturers most often outsource their manufacturing process, to manufacturers in foreign jurisdictions. And the risk to them is that the human rights standards, or the labor standards in those countries might not be as strong as what it is in their home country, and therefore they stand the chance of reputational damage and even boycotts in terms of who is manufacturing for them. And so you have to think of your impact as, are you causing it directly? Are you contributing to it? Are you failing to take remedial action? Or can you be directly linked to an activity? It is directly linked, for example, a company might hire security operatives for its operations, and those security operatives are having a negative impact on the society, either by disrespecting people's human rights and the rest of it. In this society's mind, is the company's action. Of course, they are not directly being done by the company, but it's the company's action. So by this, you need to drop processes to seek information from your suppliers, access their impacts, have a due diligence process in relation to this, and then have plans to prevent or mitigate impacts arising from these business relationships. Now, assess the significance of these impacts. So these impacts will not all be will not all have the same significance. Some will be more important than the other. And the way to do this, you can use quantitative or qualitative assessments. And for negative impacts, you can use the severity of the actual impact, and the severity and likelihood where they're actually potential. So you have to check likelihood if it's not an actual impact, but a potential impact that can occur. And of course, severity of an impact always take precedence over the likelihood. And one example I'll give here is that of the Ford Pinto. So there was a Ford Pinto car that was developed, and the manufacturers or the inventors of that car realized that the car tended to have issues when people hit it from behind. And when this happens, there's usually an explosion. And they did a risk-benefit analysis to determine whether or not to fix that demand flaw. And rather than fix the demand flaw, they came up with the conclusion that it will save the company more money not to fix the demand flaw, because only maybe just under 200 people can be affected by accidents linked to that demand flaw. Of course, this can't happen today because the laws have actually changed, and if there are actual design flaws in cars, they have to recall those products. But this shows you the kind of thinking companies were having when determining these issues. Another popular example is the BP oil spill, whereby there was an oil spill, which till today is the largest or the most significant oil spill, in recorded history. And of course, BP suffered a lot of fines, and it's even pleaded guilty to manslaughter, over that particular incident. So every time you are thinking of ESG issues, safety issues, health issues, the environment, always know that the severity is, will someone lose a life? What's the severity and what's the likelihood? Severity will always take precedence over likelihood. Consideration may also be given to relevant risk mitigants which are in place. For positive impacts, consider scale and scope, And then the last is actually an activity that has to do with reporting your, ESG performance, and that has to do with prioritizing the most significant impact. So this has to do with setting a particular threshold to determine, topics which are material. So in the previous step of assessing the significance of impacts, you actually have to, set scores. There's a way you can award scores or marks to, the severity or the likelihood of an impact, and then come up with a score. And then this will actually help you set a threshold to determine which topics are material and which are least material. Test the material topics with experts and information users. Consult stakeholders, / proxies, trade unions, civil society, sustainability specialists, government agencies, and so on and so forth on how to prioritize. Test material topics against topics in the sector standards. I mean, I mentioned the GRI sector standards earlier, being considered, by a wide range of stakeholders, and they've determined that for certain sectors, certain topics are recurrent. So once you finish your materiality assessment, you actually have to look at the sector standard to see that, okay, we didn't go so far from it, or we went so far from it, and then determine why, that is the case. And that actually brings me to the end of my discussion. I would take a few questions from the audience. Okay. What are the common mistakes people, organizations make in coming up with ESG plans? Now, a lot of people and organizations in coming up with ESG plans, they actually just they go for the, ESG issues and goals that are most, easy for them to address, rather than actually looking at their impact, vis-a-vis the issues they are, addressing. So that's one common mistake people or organizations make. So it's easier for you to, paint the public school in the community where you operate. You go ahead and do it, or it's easier to provide drugs to the hospital close by. Yeah, those are lofty ideals. But in terms of, and from an ESG perspective, it's not really about the benefits, but you have to look at the issues in terms of the impact, negative and positive, you are having on, the society. Another mistake a lot of organizations make is to focus on the positive contribution they're having to the society, as against the negative ones. So you have to consider the negative impact you are having. For example, if a company has an impact, a negative impact on the environment, it then has to then look for initiatives to counterbalance those negative impact in terms of maybe positive or environmentally friendly initiatives, to counterbalance that. And that's the, way to think about these things. Can a business be considered as too small to have ESG plans? No. A business can be considered as too small to have an ESG plan. I mean, the risk management of a company would actually have to fit within, or the ESG plan of a company will have to fit within the particular circumstance of that company, of course, accordance with relevant laws and regulation. So you apply relevant principles from laws, from, standards and framework in accordance with your respective core value and, enterprise risk framework. So you can actually adopt your ESG strategy to fit in with the size of your company. Are there other laws that require companies to consider or execute ESG policies? Yes, there are other laws. I mean, we made mention of the Companies and Allied Matters Act earlier. I think we also made mention of the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance, as well as the Climate Change Act. But the way the Nigerian legal framework is, even tax laws encourage companies to execute, ESG policies and, programs. For example, a very popular one with companies now is the tax framework, whereby if you build or rehabilitate, certain federal roads, you are granted some tax, benefits. And, this kind of initiatives actually spread through, tax legislation. There's another tax benefits where, maybe you are the first person to build a road or provide some form of amenities in a rural environment. There's a way the tax law, rewards you for that. So this Nigerian law is actually very big on ESG, but I won't say there's any one single law that summarizes all, the ESG requirements for, for companies. In the oil and gas industry, for example, you have the Petroleum Industry Act. It talks about different things, but it also talks about things like the host community development trust, which sort of says, okay, you have to take cognizance of the host community. And for people that are conversant with the industry, you know that host community is actually one of your biggest stakeholders, as well as one of your biggest ESG issues, in the industry. It also talks of things like decommissioning and abandonment, as well as having environmental management plan. Another law applicable to the oil and gas industry is the Nigerian Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative Act, the Nigerian Oil and Gas Industry Content Development Act. And I mean, these laws have a lot of provisions in them which encourages or require companies to take cognizance of ESG issues. Environment law, the whole of environment law is about ESG. The Environmental Impact Assessment Act, saying think of the impact of your project on the environment even before you start that project. The National Environmental Standards and Regulation Enforcement Agency Act, it covers a wide range of environmental issues, even including noise. It would surprise you how detailed some of these laws can go. You also have the Harmful Waste Special Criminal Provisions Act. On the social perspective, you have a whole lot of laws: Industrial Training Act, Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibition Act, HIV and AIDS Anti-Discrimination Act, and the rest of that. Okay. Another question: what is the role of ESG risk scores and ratings? Now, ESG cost scores and ratings, I'm trying to refrain from describing them as some form of grievance mechanism, when it comes to ESG. But ESG risk scores and ratings, they'll usually be conducted by, an independent party. And, they'll tell you, okay, these are the things you've done right, these are the things you've done wrong. This is the score rating we are giving you. And, this is why, essentially. So, 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 um, ratings, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a moment there. Ratings and, yeah, so So this is some form of, I can call it some form of grievance mechanism, because if you are not doing something right, the rating system is actually going to highlight this to you, and then you can actually start, addressing that. And it's actually becoming very important in terms of assessing finance. Your financials these days will actually consider these ratings, if they actually have ESG considerations to address in providing finance. And you have a wide range of them: Sustainalytics, MSCI, World Benchmarking, Environmental Performance Index, Refinitiv, and the rest of them. What other question? Let me see. Okay. Says, okay, I think I've answered this. Can a business be considered too small? I've answered that. Okay. Hello, sir. What is your company doing to discourage carbon emissions and encourage afforestation? Okay. In terms of carbon emissions and afforestation, the environment in general, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the company here, but I mean, the company has done a lot in terms of utilizing its gas. You know, you may not, I mean, some people may make the decision it's not carbon emission, it is, another form of emission, but, that's actually one of, the greatest emissions in the industry. And, we are doing a lot more to utilize the gas we produce. And a lot of this gas goes into, developmental purpose, powering infrastructure, power projects, generating effects and the rest of that. Another thing the company is doing on this angle is encouraging, renewable energy. And, the company has a whole business line, just focused on renewable energy. And there's been a lot of publications or press releases from the company on its progress on this. I don't know if you heard of the Oando Clean Energy. It's a company, is a renewable energy business arm of the company. Its agenda is to invest in climate-friendly and bankable energy solutions across the African continent, and it's trying to meet the demand of the continent as a whole, through green and renewable sources. Of course, the company has a very, very long history when it comes to, playing a very important role in the energy value chain. And I mean, this is just the most logical step, is to branch into renewable energy. And earlier in the year, the company Ocel, that's the renewable energy signed a memorandum with the Lagos Metropolitan Area Transport Authority, Lamata, establishing a partnership between itself and Lamata in trying to roll out a system of electronic vehicle for public transportation, within the states. you know. So the company is doing a lot, because at the end of the day, crude oil gets turned into petrol, and petrol then gets turned into petrol fuels cars, and these cars actually emit a whole lot of emissions. And I mean, just thinking about that impact, we are doing something with Lamata to sort of address some of these issues. Um, okay. How should a company carry out CSR? Now, before I answer this question, I think I'll just sort of go back a bit, because before we can say how we need to relate CSR with ESG, says what? Because someone else asked, what is the difference between
ESG, and CSR. Now, for a lot of people, it's just a matter of what time period you are speaking in. The conversation around CSR were much earlier, in time. People would rather talk of CSR, but more recently, the language has shifted to ESG. And I mean, this explanation is acceptable if you look at CSR as maybe an arm of the ESG conversation, say the social, bits of the ESG conversation. But beyond this, ESG is more, structured and systematic in terms of actually achieving, these goals, while CSR is more of, about just doing stuff, if I'm permitted to say that. But ESG is more, systematic in um, arriving at, how these goals are achieved. Um, okay. And then to the main question, how frequently should a company carry out CSR? Now, it will vary from company to company. And the truth is that activities around CSR and ESG should take place in a company every single day, because you should always consider the impact you're having on the environment and on the society at large, in your business operations. And your business operations should be such a way that the ESG angle is emerged or is embedded into all the activities you are doing. You want to start a new business relationship, you have to do a due diligence. What does that due diligence address? For some companies, it would be issues like money laundering. For some companies, it would be issues like bribery and corruption. For some companies or for some industry, it may be, whether they have slave workers in their factory. So it will vary, but you should have certain processes and procedure that ensures that every single day you take cognizance of your impact on ESG issues. Can an ESG improve financial performance? Now, I might have skipped this earlier, but ESG actually has a way of ultimately becoming very, very significant in terms of the financial performance of a company. And I'm going to give a couple of examples as to why this is so. And one example is the example of the deep water horizon oil spill, which I referenced earlier. This happened in April 2010. It killed about 11 crewmen and led to the largest marine oil spill in history. Now, the incident as a whole cost BP PLC, which was the company behind the oil spill, or the company ultimately responsible for the oil spill, it cost them 65 billion US dollars. And to put this in perspective, the national reserve for Nigeria is not up to $65 billion, and a single company had to pay this out in terms of addressing a single incident, which was the oil spill. And it didn't stop there. The company had to plead guilty to several criminal charges. It had to plead guilty to manslaughter, and it was also further fined about 6 billion US dollars in criminal penalties. Now, you say, yeah, but what does this have to do with ESGs and accident and rest of that? Now, before this incident happened, it's reported that about 20 minutes before the explosion, two safety engineers certified that the rig was safe, despite a clear indication that the rig was having some pressure incident. Some industry experts believe that the safety of the rig, that on the rig, safety was probably made secondary to financial consideration. The company was trying to close out the well and move on to other projects because the project was very costly. But at the end of the day, failure to pay attention to all these safety issues, you know, the environment, led to massive fines. And of course, that affected the financial performance of the company. Now, another incident, um, this is much recent. You may have heard about the Volkswagen emission scandal, where employees in Volkswagen developed a defeat device which, falsified emissions level in about 600,000 vehicles between 2006 and 2015. At the end of the day, um, this was a lot of bad publicity for Volkswagen. But apart from that, in terms of lawsuit and fines, Volkswagen paid, over 30 billion US dollars. Again, compare this to the national reserves of Nigeria. That's probably almost everything we have, or a huge chunk of our national reserve. So it shows you the context and the, um, the kind of issues or financial issues, this can have. And to think about it another way, for example, if you operate in the fast-moving consumer, goods industry, and business is going on as fine, but you're not paying attention to ESG issues. You're not paying attention to where your raw materials are coming from. For example, you import everything. The way the country is, foreign exchange fluctuations would actually affect, the cost of you running your business. And even if you are, sourcing your raw materials locally, if you don't pay attention to the needs of those local farmers, something may just happen, and the next day you find out that you are not getting, sufficient raw materials to even break even anymore. And of course, this goes on and on and on. You can say, yeah, okay, FMCG, for example, how does all this climate change issue affect me? Now, same FMCG. We've talked about the social part of it, the environment part now. Yeah, at the end of the day, if people are not paying attention to the climate, one day there may be drought, there may be famine, there may be flooding, all arising from climate change issues, and the next thing you find out is you still can't produce what's it called? You still can't have produce and the rest of that. And so it goes on and on and on. I can take another example from another industry. Let's go to the music industry or entertainment industry, for example. Over the years, these industries have developed, but people don't sit down to think that why or what really happened, what led from point A to point B. With the music industry, for example, at some point, I think government said radio stations should play a percentage of their airtime. A percentage of their airtime should be dedicated to playing Nigerian music, and there wasn't so much Nigerian music out there to play. And what this meant was that the industry as a whole, music radio stations started seeking out Nigerian musicians to play, and they started coming up with all sort of initiatives to encourage, Nigerians to produce music. And today there's so much music out there that even, no matter what age or how long you've been singing for, you can actually make a decent living from that sector. So it goes on and on, movie industry. There's a pattern now, a lot of these online streaming platforms, YouTube, Netflix, they are focusing on locally created content. And what does that do for them? Ultimately, there are some people that won't watch Lord of the Rings or some other foreign movie, no matter how much budget it has. But a locally produced movie, they are going to watch it. For companies in those industries, they realize that if they encourage the local producers, ultimately it's going to benefit them because they would have a broader range of audience to, patronize their to patronize them. So just think about it in that sense that at the end of the day, if you are doing your ESG in the proper way, it would improve or affect financial performance one way or the other. For the oil and gas industry, a lot of oil and gas players are fast realizing that, the next 20 years, the next 40 years, the demand for oil may no longer be there. And this has led them to say, okay, so how will people still get energy at the end of the day? Okay, people are moving to renewables, and then the industry is moving to renewables. So long-term value, long-term financial performance will actually depend on how successfully, a lot of these companies um, do this. Does driving the ESG agenda mean sacrificing company returns? Well, in the short term, okay, there's another example, that I missed out. So there's a company, I can't remember the name, I think it's called Alcoa or something. And the company had been performing so poorly for a very long time. And suddenly they had a new CEO. And the CEO woke up one day and said, okay, the only way I'm going to use to change our financial performance is to focus on safety. And guess what? The performance of the company radically improved, within that period when they started focusing on safety. And nobody had any explanation to it. And scholars have tried to interpret it that, okay, from having a very good safety culture, it trickled down to a lot of things. People had less sick days, people had less reason or less accidents, there was more productivity, and, things move faster in the factory and the rest of that. And it can be surprising how attention to something that seems insignificant or costly, can affect the bottom line. I think that answers those two questions. Does driving the ESG agenda mean sacrificing company returns? No, that's not what it means. And for some people, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, it's called the enlightened shareholder principle, that you consider all these things or you consider all these things to the extent that it will help the bottom line of the company. But really, there's always a good return to doing good, one way or the other. The planet has a way of rewarding us, I guess. Okay. Okay. Does Oando has consideration for creating a synergy while exploration of solid minerals, e.g., lithium, which will definitely be impactful in the chain of the electrical industry? Yeah, so what I can say about this is that I mentioned the Oando Clean Energy project earlier, and all this was considered, and there was a pre-feasibility study which was made public, and if I recollect very well, this actually also covered solid minerals like lithium. So it's part of what Oando considered or is considering, I guess. Can you discuss the strategies adopted by Oando to ensure ESG within the countries they operate? Now, Oando largely operates in Nigeria, and we've gone into some of this, in detail in terms of the clean energy projects, as well as during the presentation. You can recollect when I said, connecting the dots, you have to consider the law, consider relevant frameworks and standards such as the GRI standard, and then consider all the relevant issues in terms of ESG. Consider the SDGs, consider, what's going on around, and then use that to use that to um, use that to develop a strategy. And to develop the strategy, you need people, dedicated people within the organization at all levels, from the board level to staff level. And then you need to develop policies and procedures to embed this within the organization. And this can vary from things like, due diligence to, you know, what have you. And at the end of the day, you report your performance. Reporting your performance means drawing up a report for your stakeholders and and publishing it. And then this actually tells you where you're lacking and how you can make improvements. I saw a very interesting question. Okay, how can you determine who the stakeholders are, as well as how and when can you engage stakeholders? Now, this is an interesting question. Who are your stakeholders? I mean, your customers, your um, regulators, stakeholders. There are a wide range of stakeholders. The community where you operate, So I think the first thing to do here is to first even sit down, identify who your possible stakeholders are. And this can even be done at the board or senior management level, or at least approved at that level, And then you categorize your stakeholders, put them into different buckets, because these people they can span a lot. Now, you then have to prioritize these stakeholders according to the impact and influence which they have on the company and fulfilling the company's objectives. After doing this, some are important, some are less important. You should determine who you should engage directly, or like what sort of engagement should you have with them. Is it just merely providing information? Is it consultation with your stakeholders? Is it some form of interaction? Is it some form of collaboration? You have to determine the type of share determine the kind of engagement you want to have with these stakeholders. Is it direct? Is it through representatives? Then you determine the frequency. How often will this engagement, be? And then you also need to look within the organization. At what level will your engagement be? Will it just be, the youth corper engaging with stakeholders, or would it be at the board level? Would your board actually address stakeholders, directly or indirectly? And then once you do all of this thing, I mean, you have to put your engagement strategy to work, and then periodically you will evaluate the strategy. Are there barriers? Are they effective enough? If they are not effective enough, you create new ones. And when you say engagements, it can be forums, councils, advisory panels, surveys, interviews, social media. It can be meetings, site visits, town halls, comment boxes, sorry, newsletters. It can be a wide range of things. So you just have to think of what sort of engagement will be convenient um, for your stakeholders. As again, just considering what is convenient, for you yourself. And I think that's the end of the time I have. I think I have just a few seconds left, and I hope you've learned a thing or two from our discussion over the last hour or so. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Till we see or hear from each other some other time. It's bye for me. Thank you very much.